All right, so hi everybody, and welcome to our 2020-2021 postdoc seminar series. And today, it's my great pleasure to invite our speaker, Lindsay Diamond, who's going to be talking about science communication and the great beyond. And so to give a very brief introduction to her, Lindsay received her PhD in biomedical sciences from the University of Florida, College of Medicine. And prior to this, she used to work at SparkFun Electronics. And she's also runs a nonprofit organization called Community Immunity, which aims to educate the community about vaccines, and which I think is actually really cool. And more recently, she was the Assistant Director of Communications at the Biofrontiers Institute. And Lindsay is currently pursuing a Master's in Information Science. So Lindsay, I'm going to pass this over to you.
Sure. Thanks so much, James, for the introduction, and thank you all for coming. I really would rather this just be an informal conversation. I want to be able to see you and not have you have to stare at slides the whole time. I think I have 4 slides altogether, just so that I can share some information that might be easier that way. As Jim said, this is an Ask Me Anything. I'm an open book, and I would love to answer any and all questions about science communication, but also just, I did a postdoc in 2009. I have not been a researcher since then, although I've held a position at CU as staff. And so I'm happy to answer any questions about jobs, industry, life outside of the academy. You can ask all the questions, even the ones that people tell you not to ask. I'm happy to answer. There are very few questions that I cannot or don't feel comfortable asking. I want to share my screen just for 1 second, because if there are any questions that you don't feel comfortable asking out loud or in chat, I put a little link together. All right, so hopefully you can see this. So let's try. Is that working? Maybe. Oh, can you see that? Or is that the?
Yeah, that's good.
That's the switched. Is that the switched view? I can't tell from here.
No, that's a good one.
Okay. So down at the bottom here, if you see that shortened link, it's just that bit.ly, so bit.ly with the slash. You do have to do the capitalization, but that'll just take you to a single a Google form. You're welcome to put your questions in there. It won't have your email attached to them. I'll just keep my eye on that. So if you feel more comfortable asking a question that way, please feel free, and I will check out that sheet every once in a while to answer questions. Otherwise, please feel free to interrupt at any time, ask questions. Like I said, I'd rather this be a conversation than me just talking at everyone. So with that, I will just give you a very brief background so that you have some context for my background, a few more details, and then we can get started. So as Jim said, I did my PhD at University of Florida. I did a postdoc. I started a couple months postdoc while I was still at University of Florida, just in a different lab. I came out to CU originally for my postdoc. I was in that postdoc for around 6 months and decided that I did not want to be academic researcher anymore. I didn't want to do science anymore, in fact, at that point. And so I left in 2009. I took a position at SparkFun Electronics. I was in charge of the manufacturing sector of an electronics company. So I was both wildly underqualified and perhaps overqualified in some ways. And it wasn't exactly a big salary jump from postdoc salary right when I started, but this was my leap of faith to get out of academia. And so I started there in 2009, the fall, and I was there for just over 8 years, almost 9 years. In that time, I went from the manufacturing side to starting the Department of Education, which was designed to get hands-on learning with electronics into K-12 and university classes. I also quadrupled my salary while I was at that company, which should tell you how low, because you all know probably what postdocs make, but I nearly quadrupled my salary. So I say that not in any way bragging at all. This is just to give you an idea that life outside of academia looks very different than life inside academia. And there are interesting opportunities that are a whole lot of fun. And if money is important to you, there's no judgment there, but there are opportunities to make a little bit more money that way too. Every time I've changed careers, I've also taken a pay cut. So I went from SparkFun, that's when I came over to BioFrontiers in the communications role. And while it's not a surprise to probably any of you, but academia doesn't pay as well as outside of academia. So it was a pretty big pay cut, but I missed science, I missed science communication. So that was a big part of the reason I came back to CU. And then during that time, I became a bit more active with the vaccine advocacy and education work that I was doing. And so I have a nonprofit that works in Boulder County, but also across the state of Colorado, doing vaccine advocacy, education, and policy work. And that got me really interested in misinformation and disinformation in social media. And so my next career phase was, I am actually back in grad school, as Jen mentioned. So I'm in the information science department now as a master's student. And I have a contract job where I look at foreign interference and political interference doing web intelligence work. So needless to say, whatever field you're getting your PhD in does not limit you in any way, shape, or form to what comes after that. If you love your research and you want to do that for the rest of your life, that is awesome. If you decide that you really like your research, but you don't want to do this for the rest of your life, that is awesome too. And you are far more qualified than you realize to do all kinds of really interesting things. And I'm happy to talk about that. I think one of the wildest things was having to go from a CV to a resume after my very short postdoc, because most places don't care about your publications or your abstracts. And so all of a sudden you've had this like multi-page document that you've been crafting, and now you have to like somehow turn that into a resume, and all of a sudden you feel like you have to delete 90% of it. And that's really scary, but it's not true. So I'm happy to talk about that as well. But anyway, that's sort of my background. Again, I would love to answer any questions about any of that. So please feel free, either put them in the chat. If you are willing to unmic yourself and ask a question, I'd love for you to just tell me who you are and maybe just quickly what your research is or what you want to do after your PhD or postdoc, just so that we can all get to know each other as well. So I'll pause for a second and see if there are any questions. Yep. I see there is, I'm just going to answer a question real quick from the spreadsheet. So somebody asked, how is information science helping me in science communication? And the answer is, I've moved a little bit away from science communication in my past roles, and I'm a little bit more interested in what's happening on social media from a misinformation or disinformation space. So my work in the information science department is not necessarily SciComm related, but more about trying to figure out, I guess, the genesis of misinformation campaigns in social media. So like, how do these campaigns start? Who's starting them? Who are they targeting? I actually think most of you can all recognize this. I got my first NSF Rapid is being submitted for funding today. So today's the rare celebratory federal funding day for me. It's been a long time. But my research will be on looking at anti-vaccine disinformation campaigns that are targeting minoritized communities. So this sort of hijacking of hashtags and phrases that belong to minoritized groups, but get picked up by anti-vaccine groups. So that's what the research will be.
I'd like to ask a question of
Sure.
hear me?
It's a little broken up. I can't quite understand you. Sorry.
Maybe while Megan gets ready, I can ask a question too. So you said that you've been like completely different topics. When you change topics in your career, how do you build your resume so that companies are like, oh, she's hasn't worked in this before, but she's great and we want her.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've done that's been really helpful is a lot of people have their CVs and their resumes available on their websites. And so sometimes I just look at the resumes and CVs of people who are in positions that I would like to hold someday or that I'm really interested in, and knowing that they've already, gotten into these roles, just looking for the kinds of things that they have done or the kinds of responsibilities that they've held. I'm certainly not like copying and pasting if I haven't done them, but I just find that to be a helpful grounding for figuring out like, okay, this person is already holding a position either at a place that I would like to be or in a position that I'd like to have. Where did they come from? What are their skills? And that was really helpful the first time I went to convert my CV to a resume, because I felt like unless somebody really needed somebody to run Western blots like 24 hours a day, like I didn't see how I was going to be helpful to someone. But I think, one of the things about the graduate school experience that is not done well anywhere I've seen is like helping students and postdocs realize how many job skills are just baked into the scientific research process that you just take for granted that you're doing them every day. But I can tell you from having spent most of my working career not around other PhD holding people is that like a lot of people have never worked like scientists. Okay, so this is not to say that other people aren't working as hard or aren't as smart by any means. It's just a different, like the things that we do to get through this process can be really advantageous outside of the process. And you may also create boundaries that you don't ever want to do some of those things again. Like I never wanted to have to wake up at 3 in the morning for a time series again. And I haven't. Yeah, I mean, things like project management, like, are we trained traditionally in project management? No, but you sure learn a lot about project management when you have to run a bunch of different experiments or run your own research. Communicating in your field, outside of your field, with a variety of personalities. There are phrases that belong on resumes that go along with all these things, and it's just learning how to like identify your skills and the things that you've learned through this process that still are very, very valuable to people outside of academia. And I'm happy to share my resume with anyone so you can see how I've taken, like, I've accepted at this point that part of the reason I didn't want to be a research scientist is that I get bored about every 4 to 5 years. And I have changed my field in one way or another almost every 5 years. And instead of feeling badly about that, like in the last couple of years, I've just been like, okay, this is who I am. There's nothing I can do about this. So I have literally changed fields or careers every 5 years. And so, I've had to make a resume that's like, hey, I'm this very strange blend of these different jobs, but I swear if you hire me, like I can do things that will be valuable to you. So anyway, I'm happy to share my resume. It's obviously, I mean, I've missed out on some opportunities, but it's gotten me at least through to this point. And so I'm happy to share that as well.
Thank you.
Megan, did you want to?
Yeah, I'll try this again. Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
Yeah, that's excellent.
So I've been meaning to talk to you for a while, so it just pulled up my questions. But how much of what you do involves science policy versus more focusing on science communication? And I don't know if you could talk about that a little bit, and if you feel comfortable as a scientist, like acting in policy work or not.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So I think, the position that I held at BioFrontiers was not a traditional like science communication position in the sense that like I did not spend a lot of my time writing. And I have not held a position at a newspaper or a magazine or any of these types of positions. So in my mind, like my SciComm experience ended up being a little bit more of like an internal or campus level communications person. And in that regard, like obviously the PhD was advantageous, but probably isn't necessary in some ways. But if you really like learning, hearing about science, digesting different science, being able to communicate with people doing a variety of different things, and then also like across campus with other communicators or the campus level communicators, then that job is fun. If you really want to dive deep into the writing side, I would certainly say like it's better to go in the direction of trying to either doing a SciComm program or getting yourself into a newsroom virtually or in person someday at a publication, because that's where you really get to work on that side of things. On the policy side, in some ways, I actually enjoy that more because there aren't a lot of scientists on the policy side. And so it's been like wildly fascinating to take science communication in the direction of like working with policymakers, legislators, where they really value the expertise of scientists, but you also have to learn to navigate a system that it's not logical at all. And there are so many like backroom channels and people, and the way you do this, you do like X, Y to get to Z, but Z's over here and you have to talk to this person. And that part's a little bit strange, but it is really rewarding to be able to add some expertise and some scientific information to procedures that sometimes, if you're not in the room, are being made without the scientific information present. And so I love the policy side. It can also be really emotionally taxing, because if you spent a lot of time around scientists, you have this, I think there's like a native level or expectation of knowledge and logic that just goes along with people being, from various fields. And so when you step into a room and you're the only scientist, you have to remember to like start from scratch, and also understand that representatives or legislators have constituents that they answer to. And so it's not as simply as like, this is what we know. This is the truth. These are the scientific facts. You have to take into account the fact that they represent their constituents. And if their constituents don't align with what the information you're bringing forward, that makes it for some very interesting conversations. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a couple questions in the spreadsheet, so I'm just going to bring those up. So one person asked if I needed a PhD to have had any of my different jobs. No, is the answer, but I can't say that. I don't think I needed to have them, but I don't know that I would have gotten any of them without it. And that's why I've never regretted leaving academia as a researcher, but I've also never regretted pushing through every time I wanted to quit my PhD to actually finishing it. Even my first job at SparkFun, where I was running the manufacturing floor, like certainly didn't need a PhD in biomedical sciences to run a manufacturing floor, but like if I didn't have it, I think they would have looked at my resume and been like, why in the world are you applying, I think they saw that and they were like, well, that's interesting. Like, what would that person bring to this position? So I think the biofrontier science communication position, it was a desired level. It wasn't required, but it was desired. So maybe that would be the closest position where the PhD was necessary. But otherwise, I think it's just helped open doors, but not necessarily been a requirement. Then there's a question, what are the questions you mentioned we are told not to ask? If you want to ask questions about pay, I will answer questions about pay. I will answer questions about benefits. I will answer questions about why I stayed or left positions. Really, like, I feel like there are a lot of questions that feel rude to ask people, and the fun of an AMA is that unless something is just way off the mark or I can't answer it, I will answer it. And if half the reason I made this form is because if you feel like a bit odd asking that question out loud, let it show up in the spreadsheet and I will answer it, no problem. My least favorite thing about industry or non-academic work. I will say that there was like a cleanliness and a simplicity to being in a position where the goal is to make a company money at the end of the day. That is not to say that, like, the company had really good culture. It was really good morals and ethics. The people were really good. So it wasn't like we were doing anything that I had a problem with morally or ethically. So, like, we were doing really good things. I was surrounded by amazing people. But like the good and the bad was that, like, at the end of the day, like, my job was to make this company money. And I think that was both, there was, like, it was clean and simple compared to academia, but it's also, there were days where you just kind of feel yucky, like you're doing all of this to make a company more money. And on a really bad day, you might think to yourself, I'm doing all this to make someone else a whole lot of money. Because even, you know, though I have no complaints about my pay, obviously the owner of the company stood to reap far more benefits even than I did. So there were also moments where it's like, wow, I'm, you know, working 60 hours, 80 hours, you know, I make good money, but that person's making a whole lot of money. And so I think sometimes that can be a little weird if you've been in academia for a long time, because it's not usually about the bottom line. It's not usually about who's making money. So I think maybe it's not my least favorite thing, but it was definitely something that there were times where I had to make sense of, was that, like, it's nice to know that you can absolutely tell whether you're doing a good job, in the sense that if money's going up, then you can be like, I helped to do that. But you also have to be comfortable with, like, the fact that whatever you're doing is potentially making other people, you know, a lot of money, and maybe it's not ending up in your pocket. Let's see. Do you make consistent money to feel comfortable? It seems scary about more freelance-based work. Yeah, that's a great question. So this is the first time in my life that I've been in more of in a contract or freelance style of work. Yeah, it's strange. I think that it always seemed appealing because somehow it seemed more flexible, and that maybe I would be more in control, but you still answer to people. And in my case, I answer to two different entities. I don't find myself really being that much more flexible. But and I don't have benefits. So, I mean, I have them thankfully through, you know, my partner, but I don't currently have benefits of my own. And this is the first time I haven't had benefits since I've been an adult. So that feels weird. But I do, from a monetary side, yes, I'm comfortable. It's been fine. It's a little bit weird because typically as contractor freelance, you ask for more money than you were making because you're not being taxed and you're not they're not paying for benefits for you. So that was a little bit weird to like come up with, how do I value my time? Like, what is my hour worth? But yeah, to be perfectly honest though, like I look forward to a time where I'm not on a contract or freelance situation. It's working really well because I'm in grad school again, but as it turns out, I don't actually really enjoy the freelance contract situation that much. And I look forward to having a full-time job where I just have one entity that I need to focus on. Yeah. How do you get involved in local change? If that's about like policy or things happening in your community that might be like science or your research area adjacent, there's a couple of ways that I would suggest. I mean, obviously we're attached to a campus, so look to see if there are any groups on campus that maybe are either directly involved or maybe adjacent to whatever you're passionate about. Look for Facebook groups. I know that's a kind of a weird thing to say, but actually, there's so many millions of Facebook groups. It could be worth just seeing what's out there. I'm not guaranteeing that it'll be a good community for you to land in, but it's worth looking. And then, if there are, like if this is about policy in particular, there are, depending on what area you're interested in, look for whatever the public agencies maybe are related to that, reaching out to them, or reach out to your local representatives too. That was one of the most interesting things that's come out of doing the vaccine work, was getting to know the public health people in Boulder County and across the state, as well as I never even knew the names of my representatives. I'm not proud to tell you that, but that's just the truth. I think it's because I was in a lab and I just didn't have time to pay attention to those things, or I was working and I didn't. And now I can tell you, who my representatives are, who the neighboring, areas of Boulder County, who represents them, what they're interested in, what you shouldn't go to them about, what you should. And so, yeah, I mean, just get involved with something you're passionate about. And whoever asked this question, if you have more specific questions, feel free to email me. I have a slide with my email address on here that I can pop up, and I can hopefully help direct you if I can be of any help. Also, anybody pipe in at any time. There are more questions in the spreadsheet, but I don't want to just, please feel free to ask questions as well. Is it harder to plan having a family when following your passion at SciComm? Well, I don't have anything to compare it to, but I would say I had my child during my years at SparkFun, and I had I just had a particularly hard pregnancy. I had a medical issue that put me on bed rest for 8 weeks. And I was really glad to be working at a company that had good people and good policies in place. I think even at that time, this is 7 years ago now, we had some kind of maternity leave, but not great. Now the company has maternity leave, paternity leave. So, I think it's hard to have a family anywhere you are. That's my personal opinion, but I don't think there's any one way that's maybe easier or harder, other than, I'm sure it can be challenging to start a family while you're still a grad student or a postdoc, just because the expectations around your productivity are really high. And depending on who your research advisor is, that could play into that. Whereas a company might have more strict policies or friendlier policies to this, and guidelines that just make it easier to start a family. But yeah, I mean, I was lucky to be surrounded by really good people when we started a family. But check out the policies, look at what kind of support structures are in place, because I loved that company, but I went back to work 6 weeks after, because we couldn't really afford to do anything other than that because of FMLA situations. Did you tell your current boss when you started looking for other jobs or after? It depends on the situation. When I decided I didn't want to be a postdoc anymore and I didn't want to be an academic researcher, I did not tell my research advisor until I was absolutely certain, because I didn't think that was going to go well if I showed like that I was wavering and on the fence. So I waited. The Cup was a coffee shop on Pearl Street. It's no longer around, unfortunately, but in 2009, that was my favorite coffee shop. And I remember going there one day. I just walked from campus. I had to get away for a little bit. And I sat down and I realized, like, okay, like this is it. I'm officially done. And I remember looking on Craigslist because I was like, I guess I just have to find a job. And that was when I saw the SparkFun job. I didn't know anything about the company. I don't know why. I just was looking at all jobs. And so once I decided that I was going to do that, I think I put in my application, and when I heard that they were interested in interviewing me, I decided that that was time. So that's when I told my research advisor that, you know, it was time. I didn't want to do that anymore. I felt really guilty about holding a postdoc position because I know they're not that easy to get. And I felt badly about being kind of a wishy-washy postdoc. And so I just had a conversation with him and let him know that I would give him as much time as possible. And then, yeah, that was that one. When I left SparkFun for BioFrontiers, that one was a little bit more unusual because I had started a relationship with the person who hired me at BioFrontiers. And so there were just a lot of conversations about like, maybe there would be something in the future. And so I didn't say anything at that time until there was a position to apply to. And I waited until things got a little bit more serious before I told my boss at SparkFun that leaving BioFrontiers was a little bit unusual just because there was a furlough situation involved. So I had been furloughed to 50%. That wasn't going to work that well long term for our family situation. And it wasn't clear what was going to happen after the other side of the temporary furlough status. And so I resigned from my position at BioFrontiers just so I could figure out what was next for me. I had been toying with the idea of doing the master's program in information science anyway. And like I said, I got really interested in misinformation and disinformation. And I thought, well, here's this sort of an unfortunate but weird opportunity to do one of my 5-year pivots, although this one was a little bit shorter. This was 3-year. So yeah, I think it's a delicate balance of when you know, I think it's best to give people as much time as possible, but you don't want to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation where if you don't get the job, you've already signaled, you know, that you're leaving or that you're interested in leaving. And then once I've gotten a position, I've always just tried to come up with a really fair amount of time to stay on so that the new people that are hiring you feel like they're getting you as soon as they can, but where you can leave wherever you're leaving in a good place. Because ultimately, you don't really want to burn any of these bridges if possible, since they are the people for whom will give you your recommendations for whatever comes next. Yeah, I think that's all right. I've worked through the questions in the spreadsheet so far. I'm happy to answer any more though.
So Lindsay, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So how do you find the time at work, time that you're spending at work? How do you find that compared to, you know, working in industry versus working in academia?
That's a good question. I think, so I will say this, and maybe this is because I would be the first to admit that, like, I was probably a mediocre scientist. Like, I was probably just a fine scientist and was not, you know, destined for a Nobel. But like, and just maybe the areas that I did my research in were just like fraught with failure. Like, no matter how hard you try, no matter what you do, no matter how clean everything is, you've autoclaved everything to the world and back. Like, I worked with a lot of fresh tumor samples during my PhD. Like, things just got infected, things fell apart. I mean, experiments just failed constantly. Nothing in my life has ever felt like that since like doing research. It just doesn't, like, I mean, I have all kinds of bad days and things go on fire, and, you know, I'm putting out fires all the time, but there's just a lot of like really hard failure, I feel like, in research, whether it's funding related, whether it's just completely out of your, you know, you get scooped, things happen. That is just unlike the rest of the world. And so, yeah, I'm still super stressed out sometimes. Like, there are really hard days, things still fall apart. I still fail sometimes, but it's not that feeling of like where you keep digging down and it's like really hard to come out and just like feel really great about your work. And so I would say that's been like the biggest change. Is, I mean, I love science still to this day. I am proud of the research that did work. I'm proud of the research that didn't work, but like, it's hard to do that day in, day out, and not just feel the immense weight of all of that all the time. I feel like in industry, there have been a lot more wins and a lot of days that are just like, I did my work, and that's all that was expected of me. It's kind of like a neutral, but you know what? Sometimes neutral is okay. And so, yeah, I don't say that to dissuade anyone from pursuing research, be it in industry or academia. It's just, for me, the failures and the hardships were sort of additive, and it was just a lot to take on all the time. And I appreciate the fact that it's been since 2009 that I have not felt like that ever since. I've cried because of work. I've been, you know, like, things have been really hard, but it's never been like it was, you know, in that way. So yeah, I guess that's it sounds perhaps depressing, but it's really more meant to be uplifting, that, like, you know, academia really works for a lot of people. They thrive in it, they're happy at it. And it's 100% okay if that's not you, and there are other things you can do with your skills that maybe will be better for your health. Let's see. Oh, somebody asked, what does a typical day, a work day, look like for you? I don't know that I have a typical day anymore. I think that's one thing about the contract and freelance situation that maybe can be a benefit, depending on if you like things to be a little bit out of control and mixing it up a bit. So I'm part-time master's student. So, like, on a day that is going on, I'm taking classes and doing research. My contract job, where I do the disinformation research, the political interference, I cannot tell you who I work for directly or why, but I can say that those days I spend a lot of my time translating websites and publications from other languages, from countries who the United States typically has challenging relationships with, especially in terms of political interference. And so those days I'm just down digging in the dark web, translating things and trying to figure out what is legitimate, what's authentic, what's inauthentic. So those days are, working in disinformation is interesting. I think you have to have thick skin, and I think you have to be able to disassociate yourself from the material that you're looking at all day. It is not pleasant information that I see. So I grew up in a Jewish household. I don't practice, but like, I'm exposed to like extremely strong anti-Semitism on a daily basis just from looking at disinformation all over the dark web. So like, you know, I have to be able to just be like, I know this exists, I know this is happening, of course, and be able to look at it and translate information about it and be able to like turn off my computer screen and go have dinner with my family and not be like, wow, the world is yikes. So there are days where that's, you know, a big part of what I do. My becoming a contract freelancer, just because that overlaps with the pandemic, is just also weird because I can't tell how much of my life is being dictated by the fact that I'm like a contractor who would be working from home anyway, and how much is because of the situation we're in. So that part's a little bit weird. I'd like to think that when I feel comfortable being around other people and doing things socially, that that'll also help balance the like hours spent on the screen looking at a bunch of, you know, disinformation. This isn't directly answering that, but I guess maybe it's interesting to know that, you know, I would say I probably do about 20 to 30 hours a week for the contract, and then the rest is spent on the master's program, whether that's 10, 20, or 30. You know, it could be different every week.
So actually,
most PhD programs. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Just wanted to follow up a little bit on the on what you were saying earlier. So, you know, are there things that you think we could do as scientists, as postdocs, to help you know, the public to better understand science, to make sure there's accurate science going out? Is there, you know, what can we do to help out in this?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think that if you are already spending time on social media anyway, I think that that's a really great place to share information. I will say that the most rewarding like science communication that I still do to this day is actually just putting information out on Facebook to my friends and family and the groups that I'm in. It doesn't have to be, you know, this is informal. Like, as you know, I love vaccines. That's my passion. That's my area of interest. So of course, like a lot of people have questions about the COVID vaccines right now. So I spend probably like more hours a week than I should answering people's questions about vaccines, putting posts up, trying to get people access to appointments. But when there isn't a pandemic, like, you know, it's trying to help people sort out good information from bad information about science. And that can be done just even within your own circles of family and friends. You can have a huge impact. If you want to have a more public facing impact, you know, sharing research updates on Twitter when you can, you know, doing not overly long, but like maybe a short thread that's, you know, easier for people outside of your field or even non-scientists to understand what it is that you do or why. You know, there's Science Buffs on campus. That's a great organization to get involved with. And then, you know, one of the things that I started doing was writing op-eds for the Daily Camera. That was like some of the earliest SciComm I ever did, was just like, I got worked up about something that was happening in the community that was science related. And I started writing opinion pieces and editorials because I figured that would get in front of the eyes of people who maybe aren't thinking about stuff or don't have the scientific background. And then if you like speaking, or public speaking is a challenge, but something that you want to overcome. Obviously right now it's a little bit tricky, but you know, when the Ignite Boulder or the TEDx Boulder, when these, or TEDx Mile High or TEDx CU, these are great opportunities to get up and talk about whatever you're passionate about or whatever you're interested in. And then from a policy standpoint, if you're interested in policy, there are like the National Science Policy Network, there are some SciPol or science policy organizations that I highly recommend because they have trainings, they have opportunities to connect you with people in your area that work on policy. Let's see, there's another question. So most PhD programs don't have training for communicating with non-scientists and sometimes don't even encourage those activities. How much more do you think, hold on, I can't read the last part. How much more do you think this should be emphasized, possibly as a formal part of the PhD? Do you think we need to change how, oh, I need to text wrap, hold on. Let's think we need to change how scientists view the general public and how they communicate with them? Yes, yes to all of the above. Yes, I absolutely think PhD training programs should have more in terms of communication. It is one of the things I was hoping to do in my position at BioFrontiers, and something that we were actually gearing up to do, before the pandemic hit. I think, thankfully with opportunities like there's ComSciCon and the WISE organization does their SciComm symposium. Usually, I don't know what these things will look like. I'm a little out of touch now, having been away for a bit, but hopefully those will come back when it's safe to do so. But those are really great opportunities to connect with people who are interested, to get skills with scientific communication. Sometimes you're just going to have to do this on your own because either you don't see the opportunities right in front of you, or maybe they're not encouraged in your research group or your lab. And that's unfortunate, but it can be true. So rather than trying to completely change the system, which can take more energy than you might have, just try and seek some of these things out for yourself. I will say that to the question about whether we need to change how scientists view the general public and how they communicate with them, it's like a yes and yes, but I have mixed feelings about this. So on one hand, I think scientists do a really poor job because they cannot get away from the jargon and the expectation of foundational knowledge. And also, if scientists do that, sometimes in an effort to do that, it becomes like patronizing, or like it's written or spoken in a way that the general public is less than, or is inferior to the science academy. And so I think we see it all the time when it's done really well, and I think you can probably start to recognize it when it's not done really well. So a really good science communication or science communicator is someone who doesn't leave anyone hanging because they're using jargon or they're using terms that aren't familiar, but it's done in a really like encouraging and inclusive way, so that it's like, hey, I'm really excited about this thing. I'm going to give you some background information so we're all on the same page, and like, let's talk about this. And it's not like starting right off the bat with jargon and things that only someone in your subfield would know. And it's not like, if you didn't take this class, in your PhD, you probably don't know. So like, we don't want to isolate anyone. And so, I think it's just, I've heard like really, like people will say something like, make sure it's something that your parents and grandparents understand. And like, that's really, I find that to be like incredibly offensive, because I think, my mom doesn't have an advanced degree. She's one of the smartest people I know. And like, making her understand that's not like, anyway. So I don't like when people say things like, try to write it so that your mom understands. Like, wow, that's incredibly sexist and also like really offensive. So I would just say, like, the whole point of science communication is to be inclusive and make it exciting and approachable. And you could do that without, isolating people or using jargon. And I think, sometimes people get concerned that if they put something out into the world, like maybe you write a Twitter thread, or maybe you write an article that is below like the scientific level that you're at, or what is expected of you, that somehow that's going to look poorly, for you as a scientist. And I don't think that that's true. I think that it's, at the end of the day, science is supposed to be public, right? Like, most of us have federal funding. The work that we do is supposed to better the general public and society. And so, we should be able to share this information with everyone, anyone who is interested. And I would hope that that's the goal. And it's really sad to me that more programs aren't set up, to help with that. I think spending time improving communication Sorry, folks, hold on. There we go. I think just dedicating some time to communication will help you no matter what path you take. I think that, you know, I get excited about things really easily and I wear my emotions on my face. And I generally think that, like, because I get excited about things, like I have made the case that if I want this job or I want to do this thing, you know, that I'm passionate about it or I'm excited about it. And I like to communicate. And so I think that that has helped in times when maybe what's written on my CV or resume doesn't always line up exactly. Sorry, I'm just going to turn my video off for 1 second because it seems like my internet is really slow right now. Anyway, yeah, so I just, I think that SciComm is great, and it doesn't have to be, you know, I think some people, you know, right off the bat, you want to have like your work featured in the New York Times, but it's, you know, that's a hard bar to set for oneself. Like, I think getting other people excited about your research, even if it's in your own friend and family circle, is a great place to start. It's where you can have some of the most impact is locally. And if you get really good at it locally and that turns into, you know, pieces that get bigger, or you want to go into science communication, that's great. But I think I made the mistake of thinking like, okay, you know, the goal is to get my work, you know, featured in the Atlantic or the New York Times or Wall Street Journal. And like, that's hard. That is like, that's an unfair burden and bar to set for yourself. And it takes time. One thing I did want to mention on the topic of science communication, and I am going to share my screen for 1 second. I just want to give this resource. Let's see here. 1 second while this loads. You don't have to take this all on yourself either. So I just want to share. So most, I'm not even going to bother doing the full size thing, but you know, most of the departments or institutes at CU will have a communications person. If you don't have one at your department or institute level, then your college certainly does, and above them are campus communicators. So if you're really excited about your research, if you think there's there's a story to tell, and maybe you don't feel comfortable telling it yourself, or you want to help write it, but you're not feeling like you could take that on entirely yourself, I just want to share this link with everyone because CU, the news team, the media team at CU has like a story tips website. So that's this link here. It has a couple questions for you to fill out, but if you do that, it will put you in touch with someone on the CU Boulder News team. And if they think that it's, you know, even if it's just a really great local story, maybe they think it's a national story, they will work with you. They'll help you craft the story. Obviously, if you have a department or an institute or a college person, go to them first. I say that as having been in that role. So certainly start with the person closest to you. But if maybe that person feels like they're not approachable, or if you don't know who that is, or if your department or institute doesn't have someone in a communications role, you know, go to this link, tell them about your research, tell them about a finding. If you have a paper coming out and it's really exciting, this is what their job is. They love to share CU research stories. And that way you don't have to carry the burden on yourself to get this out into the world. But if you're really interested in science communication, you know, same with you to get that out there. So I just wanted to share that. The only other slide I had, since this is up, I just wanted to share this. So I had mentioned science buffs. Obviously, things are a little bit different on campus right now, but looking forward and hoping for a better situation in the semi-near future, if you're interested in science communication, I highly recommend getting involved with science buffs. CU Science Discovery is a great organization on campus if you're interested in science outreach. So they have great programs with like K through 12 schools and libraries. There are a couple science communication grad courses. These could be old at this point, but you know, it could be worth just checking out. So there's usually one in eBio. I don't know how frequently that they offer that course. There's one in MCDB. There's one in the journalism school in the program. Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences has a class, and then there's an engineering communication. So hopefully these still exist in some form or another and are offered at least frequently enough that if you're interested, you can take them. There was an Art Loves Science group for anyone who's interested in science and art. I think that it has maybe fallen off the grid a little bit, but I think there are a lot of people that are still really interested in this, and it just needs to get off the ground again, and maybe a kick in the pants there. There's also NEST, the Nature, Environment, Science, and Technology Studio for the Arts. Again, if you're interested in science communication with an interest in how that aligns with arts. I mentioned some local SciComm events, the WISE SciComm Symposium. That's from the Women in Science and Engineering, but that is not, the events are not limited to just women in science and engineering. The SciCon, and then hopefully when it's safe to do so, maybe they're happening virtually, I'm not sure, I'm a little out of it now, but the Nerd Nights were another fun way to get involved with ScienceComm. Again, if you're interested in policy, it's not, I don't know of much going on campus. I could be wrong, but I'm just, I'm not familiar. So if you are interested in policy or anything else, that's my email address. It's just lindsay.diamond@colorado.edu. You're welcome to reach out anytime about policy or SciComm or any questions you have about my path. If you didn't get to ask a question today, or you think of one later on, my inbox is always open, so feel free to email me anytime. Oops, there we go. Yeah. Anyway, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know it's 3:30 or 3:32, so I'm happy to stay on and answer any other questions, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Cool. I want to quickly add to that and say that we are hoping to organize a science communication workshop later this year. We're hoping to get Kat and Alex from the Science Discovery Program to come in give us a little tutorial. So that'd be great.
They are wonderful. I love Kat and Alex. So I hope you're able to pull that off. They're wonderful people. Cool.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, then you know, I guess join me in thanking Lindsay for a really interesting talk today. Thank you very much, Lindsay. It's been great to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And you know, please send me an email anytime if you have any other questions.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you all.
Bye.
See ya.